we have a moron at the head of the Fed. He's a moron. You talk to the guy, it's like talking to a chair. No personality, no high intelligence, no nothing.
The public humiliation of Jerome Powell might be the most bullish catalyst for Bitcoin we've ever seen. Never before has the sitting Fed chair faced this kind of fire. Personal attacks on his competence and intellect, open accusations of fraud, and even calls for his removal. Can the President of the United States actually fire the man who controls the price of money, the single most powerful lever of global financial control? And if the illusion of Federal Reserve independence crumbles in full view of the world, what happens to confidence in the dollar itself? Today, we're digging into why this unprecedented feud is shaking the entire financial system, and why it's yet another giant flashing billboard for Bitcoin as the only exit we have. There's no shortage of bullish catalysts for Bitcoin these days. From unprecedented support from the Trump administration, the imminent passing of pro-Bitcoin and crypto bills in the Senate, and the relentless Bitcoin Treasury Company announcements that just keep coming. We've covered all of these in detail in past videos, but there's one catalyst that's often overlooked, and it might just be the biggest and most impactful one of them all. I'm talking about the continued and intensifying humiliation of sitting Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. President Trump hasn't been quiet on his vehement dislike for Powell. It started with his disapproval of not lowering interest rates in the first few months following his inauguration, and it has since ballooned into an all-out public mockery and character assassination. For example, Trump took to Truth Social to post this on June 19th. Too late, Jerome Powell is costing our country hundreds of billions of dollars. He is truly one of the dumbest and most destructive people in government, and the Fed board is complicit. Europe has had 10 cuts. We have had none. We should be 2.5 points lower and save billions on all of Biden's short-term debt. We have low inflation. Too late's an American disgrace. And it's only devolved further from there, with Trump calling him a moron in an interview from Air Force One, and even saying he has replacements in mind.
No inflation, our country's strong, our interest rate should be 3 points lower. If our interest rate was 3 points lower, that's almost $1 trillion in cost. And it's done just by the signing of a pen, but we have a moron at the head of the Fed. He's a moron.
Speaking of Jay Powell, do you have a top choice or something?
I do. I have 2 or 3 top choices.
Those?
No. You almost got me there.
And it's not just Trump who's calling for Powell's removal. FHFA Director of Federal Housing, Bill Pult, has also publicly called out Powell, refusing to cut rates as the main reason for the housing supply crisis in America.
Bill, thanks very much for joining me. And you write on X, Powell is a main reason for the housing supply crisis in the country. By improperly keeping interest rates high, Jerome Powell is trapping homeowners in low-rate mortgages and choking off existing home sales, directly fueling the housing supply crisis. He must lower rates. Bill, what do you want to see happen here?
Well, what data is he looking at to keep up rates? He's looking at no data. He's looking at his own hate, in my opinion, for President Trump, which is disgusting, is not representative of a Fed chair. There's so much money at stake, Maria. Americans are being hurt by this man. He needs to resign. Okay, we have inflation that is at 2% thanks to President Trump. He's holding these rates, the Fed fund rates, at 4%. People's mortgage affordability has been crushed in the last 4 years. People have to pay double what they had to pay compared to President Trump's first term in order to buy a home. He needs to lower rates, or he needs to step down, and he needs to do it now, not before the end of his term.
And if you're wondering, yes, this is the same federal housing director who recently announced the approval of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to count crypto holdings as part of the mortgage approval process. Now, with this accusation that higher interest rates are the direct cause of the stagnant housing market in America, I want to quickly note that Bitcoin adoption as money also plays a role here. Say what you will about Andrew Tate, but I definitely think he was onto something when he posted this. The entire Western hemisphere of real estate markets will collapse. The Ponzi can no longer find new capital, as young people with 50K opt for 0.5 Bitcoin versus use it as a deposit for 25-year interest slavery. Your house is only worth what people will pay, and nobody is buying. The case for Bitcoin eating into the massively inflated monetary premium we've added to real estate over the last several decades continues to get stronger with every new block. But I digress. Back to Trump versus Powell. With hints being dropped by Trump at firing or forcing Powell to resign, this begged the question, can the President of the United States fire the chair of the Federal Reserve? Legally speaking, a sitting Federal Reserve chair cannot be removed before the end of their term, except for, quote, cause, which is typically defined as inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office. I'll leave it to Trump to find his cause. Allegations of fraud began to materialize with an audit of recent renovations being done at the Fed building, which have ballooned to a whopping $2.5 billion.
Would you fire Jerome Powell over the Treasury renovation?
Well, he spent $2.5 million building this place. I have to say this. I think he's terrible. I think he's a total stiff. But the one thing I didn't see him as a guy that needed a palace to live in. You talk to the guy, it's like talking to nothing. It's like talking to a chair. No personality, no high intelligence, no nothing. But the one thing I would have never guessed is that he would be spending $2.5 billion to build a little extension onto the Fed.
Is that a fireable
Nobody's
offense?
ever seen. I think it sort of is, because if you look at his testimony to the House and the Senate, you take a look at the testimony, it's under it. That whole thing is, he's not talking about the problem. It's a big problem. $2.5 billion, and that's $2.5 billion now. That's going to be a lot more money than $2.5 billion.
CFPB Director Russ Voigt even drafted a formal letter to Powell demanding an explanation for this massive overspending, saying in a post on X, Chairman Jerome Powell has grossly mismanaged the Fed, and saying of the renovations, quote, now up to $2.5 billion, roughly $700 million over its initial cost. These renovations include terrace rooftop gardens, water features, VIP elevators, and premium marble. $2.5 billion for renovations of the Fed building is insane. Joe Consorti broke it down on X. At 276,000 square feet, that's $9,000 per square foot, over 20 times the average construction cost in DC. These are the people tasked with maintaining stable prices in the economy. I now understand why they're so awful at it. And things hit a breaking point earlier this week, with reports coming out via CNBC that President Trump told a roomful of Republican lawmakers that he will fire Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell after receiving approval from them to make the move. And the New York Times even reported that Trump had drafted a letter to fire Fed Chair Jerome Powell. These claims have since been walked back by the administration, with Trump saying this week at the Oval Office that firing Powell is unlikely.
Are you completely ruling out the idea of firing Jerome Powell?
I don't rule out anything, but I think it's highly unlikely unless he has to leave for fraud. I mean, it's possible there's fraud involved with the $2.7 billion renovation. This is a renovation. How do you spend $2.7 billion? And he didn't have proper clearance, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going on. So there could be something to that, but I think he's not doing a good job.
This walkback has a lot to do with the effect of firing or removing the Fed chair would have on global markets and trust in the claimed independence of the Fed. Key figures like Senator Elizabeth Warren have warned of economic fallout if pursued. But just yesterday, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent admitted to Bloomberg that a formal process to replace Powell has already begun, and that the final decision does lie with the president.
Mr. Secretary, do you still, as far as you understand, believe that's when the interview process to replace the Fed chair will begin in the fall, or has a formal process already started?
Well, look, there's a formal process that's already starting. There are a lot of great candidates, and we'll see how rapidly it progresses. It's President Trump's decision, and it will move at his speed.
So this situation is evolving and changing every single day. And markets are sitting by holding their breath as the viability of the claim that the Fed is independent from the US government continues to break down. And let's be clear, libertarians have always known central bank independence was a myth. All you need to do is read The Creature from Jekyll Island to learn about the sketchy and corrupt formation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. But now the facade is being torn down in full view of global macro investors, with trillions tied to assets like short-term US Treasuries, which price directly off rates that the Federal Reserve Chair can set in coordination with the other central banks around the world. Karen Finnerman, CEO of Metropolitan Capital, laid this out on CNBC this week and why it's bullish for Bitcoin.
One other thing that I think might be underpinning it somewhat, to the extent that Bitcoin is a play on the lack of discipline, right, of the Fed, of the government. And here we're in this situation where the idea of the independence of the Fed is at question. That, to me, is somewhat supportive of Bitcoin as well. Now, maybe that's cooled a little bit in the last day. I don't know. But I do think, though, that the down 80%, that kind of thing, I think is not on the table anymore, unless somehow it gets displaced. But I'm staying long. I'm not looking to take any off the table.
This whole fiasco shatters the illusion of monetary neutrality for the reserve currency of the world, and it's becoming more and more clear to investors around the world that Bitcoin is the only viable exit we have. So definitely keep your eye on this unfolding story, because if the White House finds grounds to fire or force a resignation of Powell, expect immediate fireworks in the value of Bitcoin. Now, I want to end on this old clip of the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, from a few years ago.
What I say is, number one, those who invest should know. It cannot be this crypto hype where, because a friend of a friend has made X, you think that it's going to work and it's going to continue to increase. It's a super risky asset. My very humble assessment is that it is worth nothing. It's based on nothing. There is no underlying assets to act as an anchor of safety. If the day when we have the central bank digital currency out, any digital euro, I will guarantee. So the central bank will be behind it.
So we can at least be grateful for one thing. Today, we finally have a choice in who to trust with our money. We can continue trusting central banks, institutions that have openly devalued the savings of everyday working people month after month, year after year for more than a century, or we can trust something that can't be manipulated, the inviolable laws of math, logic, and physics that underpin Bitcoin. You can trust every corrupt, broken system, or you can verify yourself with Bitcoin. The choice is yours. And if you're ready to move beyond the noise and start allocating with true conviction, Swan Private is here to help. The Swan Private team works with serious investors, family offices, corporate treasuries, and high net worth individuals to build long-term Bitcoin strategies, secure cold storage solutions, estate planning, and trust structures. Everything you need to build and preserve wealth across generations. Go to swan.com/private to book a call with a member of the team today. And finally, a quick shout out to Mara, the world's largest publicly traded Bitcoin miner, for supporting this show and for helping make Bitcoin the world's most decentralized and secure monetary network. I'd love to hear what you think of the humiliation of Jerome Powell and Christine Lagarde's opinions on trust and Bitcoin. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, like this video if you made it this far, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more high-signal financial takes every single day. Thanks for watching, and remember, TikTok next block.